7 Unit 1, Lesson 4, Part 1, Multiplying Integers. We're going to do the introduction to multiplication. An understanding of where multiplication comes from helps you do the multiplication. So first, understand that repeated addition is multiplication. Humans invented multiplication because they needed to add a bunch of the same number together. For example, if you are counting the number of shoes needed in a family, you could go to each member and do 2 plus 2 plus 2 plus 2 all the way through the whole community, the whole family. Or you could count up the number of people and just multiply by 2. So the definition of multiplication is based on repeated addition. For example, 3 times 7 literally means 3 7 times. So we add 3 7 times. And we do get 21. And actually when you do, you can count by threes to do multiplication. You just hold out your fingers and you count 3, 6, 9, 12, 15, 18, 21 until you get to your 7th finger. And you can multiply that way. And basically the number you multiply by tells you how many there are. Now 3 times 0 is special because there are no 3's. So 3 times 0 is just 0. Okay? Now, the number line model for multiplication, it's similar to the one for addition. 2 times 3 would be 2, 3 times. So we go 2, 3 times, and we get 6. 3 negative 3 times. Sorry, let's do this one. 3 negative... Yeah. I'm saying this backwards. I actually want this other one. We're going to do negative 3 3 times. So I do negative 3 once, twice, 3 times. I get negative 9 as the answer. Okay, let's look at the pattern here. If we do 3 times 3, that is 9. 3 times 2 is 6, and 3 times 1 is 3. 3 times 0 is 0. The pattern here appears that as I'm moving down this list, I am subtracting 3 each time. That's great. So 3 times negative 1 would actually mean to have negative 1 threes. What you do is you basically subtract 1. It ends up being, or subtract a 3. Negative 3, 6 times, 2 times negative, 3 times negative 2 would be negative 6, and 3 times negative 3 is negative 9. Now, let's look at when we start with a negative to begin with. Now, 3 times negative 3 is going to be the same as negative 3 times 3 because multiplication is commutative. So negative 3 times 3 is negative 9. Negative 3 times negative 4 is, negative 3 times 4 is negative 12. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. Negative 3 times 1 is negative 3. Negative 3 times 0, of course, is going to be 3. Now, before we get into the negatives, notice the pattern. Each one is going up by 3, so it should continue to go up by 3. Negative 3 times negative 1 is actually a positive 3. Negative 3 times negative 2 is positive 6. Negative 3 times negative 3 is positive 9. So that's kind of interesting. When we multiply a negative times a negative, we do get a positive. Now, that may be hard to wrap your mind around, so consider this situation. Here's a real-life example that will do a negative times a negative. The snowpack melts at 2 inches per day, which means it changes negative 2 inches per day. So each day I would subtract 2. So compared to today, what will the snowpack be in 2 days? Well, in 2 days, negative 2 per day times 2 days, it will be 4 inches less than it is today. In a week, well, that's negative 2 per day times 7 days. It will be 14 inches less than it is today. Now, here's where we do the negative times the negative. 3 days ago is negative 3 days. So, negative 2, it goes down 2 inches per day. And 3 days ago, it was 6 inches higher than it is now. So there's an example of multiplying a negative times a negative in real life. Okay, so looking at things quickly here, where would these end up? 12 times negative 4, because it's got one negative in it, it would just be negative. Negative 4 times 6 ends up being negative. Look for a pattern as I'm doing these. Negative 6 times 5 is negative. Negative 2 times negative 8 is positive. Negative 10 times negative 9 is positive. Negative 5 squared, that's one I want to talk about in more detail in a minute. It's actually positive because I have a negative 5 times a negative 5. Same with negative 13 squared. 4 times negative 7 is negative. Negative 7 times negative 7 is going to be positive. 20 times negative 6 is negative. Negative 1 to the 4th is actually positive, and I'll discuss that one in just a moment. Negative 14 times 5 is negative. Negative 30 times 5 is negative. Negative 5 squared. This one is a little different than that one, but it actually ends up being negative, and I will discuss what's going on here in just a moment. Negative 14 times negative 6 is positive. Negative 7 times 15 is negative. And negative 55 times 0 is actually a special number. It's neither negative nor positive. I guess I'd need a new group that would be called 0. That one would be a 0. Okay, let's talk about that negative 5 squared and without the parentheses around the negative, how it is different. So for the negative 5 squared, definition of exponents, I'm going to multiply this by itself. So I write negative 5 twice and multiply. That's negative times negative. It ends up being positive 25. Without it in the parentheses, it's kind of an order of operations thing. I actually square just the 5 and then make the answer negative. So it's negative 5 times 5, which is just going to be negative 25. So it does make a difference if the parentheses are around the exponent. Okay, so how do you know if the answer is going to be positive or negative? When you are multiplying, if you have 0 negatives, it's going to be positive. So this is the number of negatives, let's say. So the number of negatives. If you have none, you get a positive. If you have 1 negative in your problem, with multiplying, you get the negative. If you have 2, you get a positive. If you have 3, you also would get a negative. So in general, if you have an odd number of negatives in your problem, multiply problem, you would get a negative answer, and an even number would give you a positive answer. So for example, negative 3 times 1 is negative because there's 1 negative in it. Negative 2 times negative 6 is positive. Negative 2 times negative 3 times negative 4 is negative because there's 3 negatives. That's what we're talking about. Okay. You'll want to watch the next lesson. I go over the notes.